When the billionaire saw his mute twins talking to the maid, he burst into tears. When Adrian opened the nursery door that morning, he expected silence. His twin daughters had never spoken a single word since the day they were born, but instead, he heard two tiny voices struggling through fragile syllables, and his whole body went still. Emma and Grace were standing on shaky legs, reaching for Elena, the maid who'd been in their home only a few weeks. Elena still wore cleaning gloves, kneeling on the rug as if she hadn't meant to stop working at all. Ma, Emma whispered. Grace tried to copy, her mouth forming the same impossible sound. They weren't calling for him. They weren't calling for anyone he had paid to try to help them. They were trying to speak for her. Adrian felt his throat close as he watched, unable to move. Elena's voice was calm and warm, guiding the girls gently. They leaned toward her with complete trust, their eyes bright in a way he had never seen. One soft moment of connection was doing what years of therapy and specialists never had. He stepped back before Elena noticed him, heart pounding with a mix of awe and fear. His daughters had been silent their whole lives until now, and they hadn't spoken for him. They had spoken for the one person he didn't expect to matter. And deep down, he knew this moment was only the beginning of something that would change everything. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. Adrian had spent years building a life ruled by silence. After losing his wife during childbirth, he hid behind routines and long workdays, convincing himself that order was safer than feeling anything at all. The mansion became a place where echoes lived longer than people. His twin daughters existed inside that same quiet world, fragile and distant, as if sadness had shaped the walls around them. Emma and Grace were born early, tiny bodies fighting for their first breaths. Doctors warned that speech might never come, and Adrian accepted it because grief had drained him of hope. He loved them, but from a distance, afraid to get close, afraid to lose more. Their progress stayed frozen, their world small, their silence constant. Therapists, nurses, and specialists cycled through the house like passing storms. Each brought new techniques, new charts, new promises, but nothing reached the twins. They stared past flashing toys, ignored voices, and barely reacted to touch. Every attempt at connection felt like tapping on a locked door that refused to open. Elena appeared 3 weeks earlier, just another name on a list from the agency. She was hired to clean, organize, and stay quiet. Nothing more. Adrian barely noticed her at first. She moved softly through the house, humming while she worked, always respectful of boundaries. No one expected her to become part of anything meaningful, but the twins noticed her immediately. Emma's eyes followed her movements like she recognized something comforting. Grace reached for her sleeve whenever she passed, reacting in ways she never showed with nurses. At first, everyone assumed it was coincidence. Adrian ignored it, burying himself in work, pretending not to see the tiny spark forming in the background. Still, little moments kept piling up. The girls settled faster when Elena entered a room. Their bodies relaxed when they heard her humming. Their restless arms stretched toward her as if drawn by something familiar. Adrian caught these moments in passing reflections, unsure whether he imagined them or whether his daughters were truly waking up. He tried to focus on his company, on meetings, on numbers that didn't ask him to feel anything. But every time he passed the nursery and heard Elena's soft voice, he felt something shift inside him. Something he didn't know how to name. The twins, usually blank and distant, became calm in a way he hadn't seen before. What unsettled him most wasn't the change itself, but realizing how deeply his daughters responded to a warmth he hadn't been able to give. At night he stood outside their door, listening to the quiet rhythm of Elena reading or humming, wondering how someone who barely belonged to his world had become the center of theirs. And now, after witnessing the impossible, after hearing them try to speak for Elena, Adrian felt a truth rising inside him. Whatever was happening wasn't random or temporary. It was the beginning of something that would force him to face the parts of himself he had avoided for far too long. Adrian stood in the hallway long after stepping away from the nursery, his back pressed against the cold wall as if the house itself was holding him up. He tried to steady his breathing, but the echo of the girls' voices followed him like a pulse he couldn't escape. He kept repeating the same question in his mind. one he had no answer for. Why her? Why now? And why did it feel like the universe was asking him to pay attention? He moved slowly toward his office, but he didn't go inside. Something pulled him back toward the nursery door, a gentle force he hadn't felt since the days when his wife would call him with a soft laugh that made the world warmer. He closed his eyes, listening. He could hear Elena's voice, soft, steady, patient, guiding the twins through tiny sounds, celebrating every breath they formed. His hands trembled as he gripped the doorway frame. For 2 years, he had begged for anything, any sign that his daughters could hear him, feel him, need him. And in a single morning, Elena had done what he thought was impossible. She hadn't used therapy tools or medical machines. She had used something far more ordinary and somehow far more powerful: presence. Adrian stepped back inside the nursery, still unnoticed. He watched Elena lift Emma into her arms, supporting the toddler's weak legs with one hand and wiping drool from her chin with the other. She didn't flinch or hesitate. She treated the child like she was whole, not broken. And Emma rested her head on Elena's shoulder like she had always belonged there. Something cracked open in Adrian's chest, a soundless ache he couldn't hold in place anymore. He didn't understand what he was witnessing, only that it was changing everything he believed about caring for his daughters. He cleared his throat, louder than he meant to, and Elena froze. She turned around slowly, her eyes widening when she realized he had seen everything. "I didn't mean to overstep," she whispered, holding Emma protectively but gently. Her voice wasn't defensive. It was worried, afraid she had crossed a line she didn't even know existed. Adrian opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stared at his daughters, at the way Grace reached her tiny hand toward him, then toward Eleanor again, unsure who she wanted more. It hit him then. The choice wasn't theirs. It was his. He could pretend this moment meant nothing, bury it under his routines and medical reports, and move on as if miracles belonged only in stories. Or he could acknowledge the truth staring him in the face, that the girls were finally responding to life, and the source of that life was standing right in front of him, holding Emma against her chest. His voice came out quieter than he expected. "How did you do that?" he asked. Elena swallowed hard, glancing between him and the girls. "I just talk to them," she said softly. "I sit with them. I don't rush them. I don't treat them like they're waiting for something impossible. I just see them." The simplicity of her answer hit him harder than any diagnosis he had ever heard. Adrian felt something shift under his ribs, something old and heavy finally loosening. He didn't know what it meant, not yet, but he knew this moment was a turning point, and walking away from it would be like walking away from his daughters all over again. And as he stood there realizing that, a quiet, unsettling question formed in the back of his mind, one he wasn't ready to face, but couldn't ignore. Adrian didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his bed staring at the door, listening for any sound from the nursery down the hall. The house felt heavier than usual, the kind of heavy that comes when truth finally pushes through years of denial. He replayed the scene over and over again, the tiny voices, the fragile syllables, the way the girls leaned toward Elena like she was the only safe place in the world. It left him with a fear he didn't know how to name. He walked to the nursery sometime after midnight, unable to stop himself. He cracked the door open just enough to see the soft glow of the nightlight spill across the room. The twins were asleep, small bodies curled under pale pink blankets. Elena sat in a rocking chair beside them, one hand resting gently on Grace's arm as she hummed a quiet melody. She wasn't sleeping. She was guarding them. Adrian's chest tightened at the sight. He had never stayed awake through the night like that, not since the day the twins were born. Back then, he had held both babies in his arms, while doctors whispered words that shattered everything. He remembered the tubes, the alarms, the sterile smell of fear. He remembered feeling helpless, watching his wife fade while the girls clung to life. And after she died, he didn't know how to touch them without feeling like he was doing it wrong. He stepped further into the room and lowered himself to the floor, sitting against the wall because his legs felt too weak to hold him. Elena hadn't noticed him yet. She had fallen into that quiet focus only people who love deeply seem to carry. He watched her stroke Grace's hair, smoothing it back gently, whispering words Adrian couldn't hear. words he wished he knew how to say. For the first time, he realized he didn't know his daughter's nighttime sounds. He didn't know which one whimpered when she dreamed, or which one kicked her blanket off, or which one needed to be held close. He didn't know the rhythm of their breathing. He didn't know the weight of their trust. And the emptiness of that truth broke something in him, a quiet cracking he felt deep in his bones. The longer he watched, the more he saw how naturally the girls belonged in Elena's orbit. Even asleep, they leaned slightly toward her chair, as if their bodies remembered her warmth. Adrian felt a familiar panic rise up inside him, the kind that whispers, "You're not enough. You've never been enough. You're too late." He pressed his palms to his face, trying to breathe through the ache sitting heavy in his chest. When Elena finally looked up and saw him, she didn't startle. Her expression wasn't defensive or embarrassed. She simply gave him a soft, understanding look, the kind people give when they recognize pain without needing it explained. Adrian felt exposed, like she could see every fracture he had spent years hiding behind money and distance. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Elena stood slowly, walked to him, and sat down on the floor a few feet away, leaving enough space not to overwhelm him. "It's okay to feel this," she said quietly, her voice warm and steady. Adrian didn't know whether she meant the guilt, the grief, or the fear, and maybe she meant all of it. He had spent so long living inside his own silence that he didn't know how to break it. And as he stared at his daughters sleeping peacefully, he wondered if there was still a way back to them, or if that chance was already slipping through his fingers. The next morning, Adrian woke up with a weight in his chest he couldn't ignore. He knew he needed answers, real ones, not the kind that hid behind charts or schedules. So he found Elena in the kitchen, packing away folded towels, her hair tied back in a loose braid. She looked up when she sensed him, her expression gentle but guarded. She knew something was coming, and she braced herself without flinching. "I need to understand what's happening," Adrian said quietly, leaning against the counter because he didn't trust his balance. Elena set the towels down and folded her hands in front of her apron. "I wasn't trying to replace anyone, sir," she whispered. There was sincerity in her voice, the kind that left no room for performance. "I just saw things others didn't." Her tone held a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face. He asked her how long the girls had been responding to her, expecting maybe a day or two. Instead, Elena looked down at the floor, gathering courage before she spoke. "Since the first night," she admitted softly. "They couldn't make sounds then, but they tried. Emma kept reaching for my voice, and Grace would lean toward my hand whenever I touched her blanket." The confession hit him harder than he expected. Adrian sank into a chair, stunned. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked. Elena hesitated, her eyes glistening. "Because every time they looked at you, they froze," she said gently. "Not out of fear, out of confusion. They feel your heart, even when you try to hide it. And they don't know what to do with all that sadness." Her words weren't an accusation. They were a fragile truth, spoken with compassion. She walked around the table and knelt beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "Kids like them. They don't respond to noise or pressure," she continued. "They respond to presence, to warmth, to someone showing up without asking anything back." Adrian felt his throat close as he realized how rarely he had shown up in that way. Money had filled every room except the one that mattered. Then Elena reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn notebook. She placed it on the table carefully, as if it carried something sacred. "I wasn't sure if I should show you this," she whispered. Adrian recognized the handwriting immediately. Curved, soft letters he had memorized long before grief washed the world in gray. It was his wife's. His breath caught in his chest. He flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. Notes, lullabies, messages for the twins. And in the middle, a line underlined twice. "If they struggle, speak to them slowly. Don't rush them. They will bloom for gentleness." His vision blurred as he understood. Elena had been following his wife's words without even knowing her. The connection wasn't random. It was woven into the walls of the house long before she arrived. Adrian looked at Elena with a mixture of awe and fear. She wasn't just someone his daughters trusted. She was someone who unknowingly carried a piece of the woman he had loved most. And as he stared at the notebook, a single thought rose inside him, so clear it stole his breath. Maybe Elena wasn't here by accident. Maybe she was the only person capable of reopening a door he had locked the day his world fell apart. And maybe that door was about to reveal even more than he was ready to see. Adrian spent the rest of the morning walking through the house with the notebook pressed against his chest, as if holding it made his wife feel closer somehow. Every word she wrote felt like a whisper meant for this exact moment, meant to guide him toward the daughters he had watched from a distance for too long. He knew what he had to do, but fear sat heavy inside him. Fear of failing, fear of trying too late, fear of discovering he was a stranger to his own children. He found Emma and Grace in the playroom with Elena, the girls sitting in her lap while she guided their hands through a picture book. Adrian watched from the doorway, feeling the familiar urge to step back and let someone else handle what he didn't know how to. But something in him pushed forward instead, a small courage he hadn't felt in years. He walked inside slowly, his palms sweating, his heartbeat loud in his ears. Elena looked up, surprised, but she didn't move away. She shifted just enough to make space, silently inviting him to join. Adrian knelt beside them, his knees stiff from nervousness. Grace's eyes flicked toward him, unsure at first, then curious. Emma reached a tiny hand toward the pages, as if showing him the colors she loved. It wasn't much, but it was the first time they had ever reached for something while he was watching. He picked up the book with trembling fingers and tried reading a line the way Elena did. Slow, warm, patient. His voice cracked on the first word. He tried again, softer this time. Emma blinked, her mouth parting slightly, a spark of recognition shining in her expression. Grace touched the sleeve of his shirt, gripping the fabric with unsteady strength. For Adrian, the gesture felt like a sunrise breaking through a long, cold night. The more he tried, the more the twins responded. Small movements, small breaths, small shifts toward him. Elena watched quietly, her eyes soft, giving him the room to figure out his own rhythm. And for the first time, Adrian realized he wasn't competing with her. He wasn't being replaced. He was being invited by his daughters, by life, by the love he once believed he had lost forever. Hours passed without him noticing. He fed the girls lunch, clumsily wiping their chins. He learned the little sounds they made when they were excited, and the tiny frowns that meant they were tired. He held them when they grew restless, uncertain if he was doing it right, but refusing to let go. Every minute felt like opening a door that had been locked inside him for too long. In the afternoon, one of the nurses saw him alone with the girls and froze, startled. The staff had never seen Adrian caring for the twins without someone's help. Elena entered just then, watching silently as he held Grace against his chest. She didn't interrupt, didn't correct him, didn't take over. She simply nodded, a quiet encouragement that carried more weight than any praise could. Adrian felt the knot in his heart loosen, but vulnerability brought new questions that unsettled him. The more he connected with Emma and Grace, the more he wondered why it took so long for him to try. Why he needed Elena to show him what was always there. Why his wife's words, written years ago, seemed to be guiding him now through someone else's hands. As he placed the twins in their crib for a nap, a heavy truth formed inside him, one he wasn't prepared to face, and one that would force him to look at his past in a way he had avoided for far too long. That evening, the house felt different the moment the sun began to fall behind the tall windows. The light turned softer, warmer, almost golden, the kind of light that makes even silence feel gentle. Adrian walked into the nursery just as Elena was lowering the twins into their crib after their bath. Their little curls were damp, their cheeks flushed from warm water, and for the first time, he saw them looking at him with something he had never seen before: expectation. He approached slowly, unsure if he was allowed to join this quiet ritual, but Elena stepped aside without a word. She placed a small blanket in his hands, one that still smelled faintly of baby lotion and lavender soap. Adrian swallowed as he tucked the blanket around Emma, his movements awkward but careful. She giggled softly, a tiny sound, barely there, but full of life. It hit him so hard he had to blink back tears. Elena sat on the rocking chair and began humming the melody the girls loved, the same one she found in his wife's notebook. But this time, the sound didn't make Adrian break. It held him together. He sat on the floor beside the crib, watching his daughter's eyes soften, their small hands reaching through the bars. Grace's fingers brushed against his, a hesitant touch, like she was learning the shape of his presence. He didn't pull away. He held her hand as gently as he could. Emma tried to copy the humming, her mouth forming soft, unsteady sounds. She whispered. Elena smiled while rocking slowly, her gaze moving between Adrian and the girls. "She's trying to match your voice," she said quietly. The words made Adrian's breath hitch. No therapist, no specialist had ever said anything like that. Not in 2 years. And here, in this warm glow, in this ordinary moment, everything felt suddenly possible. Adrian leaned closer, letting his voice mix with Elena's, uncertain at first but growing steadier with each breath. The twins relaxed instantly, their bodies sinking into the mattress as if the room itself exhaled in relief. Elena's humming softened until it faded completely, and Adrian was left carrying the melody alone. He didn't realize he was crying until a tear fell onto his hand resting on the crib rail. The girls reacted to the sound of his quiet sniffle. Emma reached up, touching the air like she was trying to wipe his sadness. Grace mirrored her sister, her fingers trembling while stretching toward him. Adrian covered their hands with his own, overwhelmed by the softness of the moment. For the first time since the day they were born, he didn't feel like a visitor in their world. He felt like he belonged to them again. Elena stood up from the rocker and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort or pity, it was acknowledgement. "They know you're here," she said softly, "and they're letting you in." Adrian closed his eyes at her words. He felt something inside him open, slow and fragile, like a door that hadn't been touched in years. He wasn't just watching change happen anymore. He was part of it. When he finally looked up at Elena, their eyes met in a silence filled with meaning neither of them had language for yet. The twins breathed peacefully between them, their small hands still touching his. And in that moment, Adrian understood that this connection wasn't accidental or temporary. It was the beginning of something none of them were fully prepared for. Something that would soon demand truths he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The next days felt like the world was quietly rearranging itself around them. Adrian started waking earlier, slipping into the nursery before the staff arrived. He learned the difference between Emma's soft morning whine and Grace's stubborn little huff. He fed them breakfast while Elena watched, not correcting his clumsy attempts, just supporting him with a quiet smile that made the room feel safer. But outside that nursery, life wasn't standing still, and neither were the people who worked for him. One afternoon, while Adrian sat on the floor stacking blocks with the twins, he heard hushed voices outside the door. 2 nurses whispered in tense tones, unaware he could hear every word. "It's not right," one said. "She's just a maid. There's no training, no certification." The other replied, "The girls are attached to her. Too attached. What happens when she leaves?" The words struck him like tiny blows, sharp and unavoidable. He stepped into the hallway, and both nurses went silent. They tried to explain themselves, but the truth hung clearly in the air. They didn't trust Elena. They didn't understand her, and they feared she was replacing whatever system they believed should exist. Adrian couldn't blame them entirely. He had spent years believing the same thing, that healing came from experts, degrees, machines. But now he knew better, even if he didn't know how to defend it yet. The tension grew when his sister, Claire, arrived unexpectedly from Boston. She had always tried to help after his wife died, and he had always pushed her away. But now she walked through the front door like a storm, demanding to know why the staff had called her. "They're saying the twins are regressing emotionally," she insisted. "They're saying you're letting a stranger take over." Adrian felt his jaw clench as old wounds resurfaced. Claire stepped into the nursery and froze at the sight of Emma asleep on Adrian's chest. Grace curled beside him like a tiny kitten. Elena sat quietly on the floor, humming a soft tune while folding laundry. Claire's eyes softened for a moment, but only a moment. "Adrian," she whispered, "you're too vulnerable. You're seeing what you want to see. This isn't normal. None of this is normal." Her fear was real, and it came from love, but it still cut deeply. Elena stood up, holding her hands together in front of her. "I don't want to replace anyone," she said gently. "I don't want to take their mother's place. I just care. Claire's eyes narrowed. Care isn't enough, she replied. These children need professional help, not emotional attachment to someone who might not stay. Elena swallowed, her composure cracking for the first time since she arrived. Adrian felt the room tighten around them. He tried to explain everything: the notebook, the words his wife left behind, the girl's first sounds, the nights of humming and healing. But Claire only saw danger. She wasn't wrong to worry. Losing his wife had broken him in ways no one understood. Trusting someone new, especially someone outside his world, terrified him as much as it terrified her. But when he looked down at Emma and Grace reaching for Eleanor, their tiny fingers trembling with need, he knew what the girls were choosing. That night, after Claire left with a warning in her eyes, Adrian walked into the nursery to find Elena sitting alone in the dark. She looked up, her face streaked with quiet tears she hadn't let anyone see. "Maybe I'm hurting them more than helping," she whispered. "Maybe your sister is right. Maybe I should step back." Her voice broke, and Adrian felt something inside him twist painfully. He didn't know how to answer her yet, or how to protect what was growing between them. All he knew was that this moment was pulling them toward a truth he wasn't sure either of them were ready to face. The following morning felt strangely still, like the house was holding its breath. Adrian walked into his office expecting another day of tension, another round of questions he didn't know how to answer. But instead, the head housekeeper was waiting for him with a small, dusty box in her hands. "We were clearing the attic storage," she said quietly. "This was labeled for you. It was your wife's." Adrian felt the air leave his lungs as he took it from her trembling fingers. He carried the box to the nursery, unsure why he needed Elena there when he opened it, but knowing he did. When he stepped inside, she was sitting on the rug with the twins, guiding their hands through a stack of soft toys. She looked up at him with a fragile kind of caution, the kind people develop when they're expecting bad news. But he said nothing. He only sat down beside her and lifted the lid of the box slowly, as if unveiling a part of his past he wasn't sure he deserved. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in his wife's handwriting, addressed to him and the twins. Some were sealed, some were not. On top lay a smaller envelope with Elena's name written in soft, uneven strokes. Adrian froze. Elena stared at it, confused. I never met her," she whispered. "Why would she write to me?" Adrian's hands shook as he passed her the envelope. "I don't know," he said, "but she did." Elena hesitated before opening it, her breath trembling as she unfolded the paper. Her eyes moved slowly across the page, widening with each line. Adrian watched her expression shift from shock to disbelief to something gentler, deeper, almost reverent. She pressed a hand to her mouth as her voice broke. She wrote this the night before the girls were born," she whispered. "She said she dreamed of a woman, someone who would help them speak when the world felt too heavy." Adrian felt a shiver climb up his spine. "What else does it say?" he asked. Elena wiped her eyes and kept reading. She said this woman would carry softness in her voice, that she would feel like a bridge between pain and hope, and that if the twins ever found her, we should trust her. Her voice cracked again. She wrote, "You'll know her by the way the girls reach for her, even before they know why." He stared at the twins, both reaching for Elena's arms, as if her presence anchored them. The room seemed to tilt, not with fear, but with a new kind of clarity. His wife hadn't predicted a name or a face. She had predicted a connection, a bond, a presence strong enough to open doors he never could. Elena clutched the letter as if it held something sacred, tears spilling freely now, her shoulders shaking from the weight of being seen long before she ever arrived. Adrian reached into the box and pulled out another envelope, this one addressed to him, sealed with a small heart drawn on the back. His hands trembled as he opened it. His wife's voice filled the room through her handwriting, tender and steady. "If grief ever keeps you from them," she wrote, "find someone who sees them the way I would have. Don't protect your heart from healing. Love will return to you through their laughter." Adrian felt his chest break open in the quietest, most painful way. Elena touched the twins softly, almost afraid of disturbing the moment. Adrian looked at her, at the girls, at the letters that tied the present to the memory of a woman he thought he had lost forever. His wife hadn't been warning him. She had been preparing him, preparing all of them. And as the last line of the letter sank in, The person who brings them voice will bring you back to life too. Adrian understood that nothing about this connection was accidental. It was all leading to something he was finally ready to accept, even if he didn't yet know how to step fully into it. The days that followed felt like stepping into a different version of the same house. Sunlight fell differently through the windows, softer somehow, as if the walls themselves had stopped holding their breath. Adrian spent every morning with Emma and Grace now, learning their cues, their tiny habits, the way their eyes brightened when he entered the room. Elena stayed close, guiding but never overshadowing, offering quiet encouragement whenever doubt crept into his voice. The twins began making more sounds, not words yet, but warm, small beginnings. They responded to Adrian's voice in a way that made his heart ache with gratitude. He read to them every night using the pacing his wife wrote about, pausing just long enough for their minds to catch up. Their smiles grew fuller, their bodies more relaxed, as if the weight they'd been carrying from birth was finally loosening its grip. Claire returned a week later, expecting chaos, expecting to argue. Instead, she saw Adrian sitting on the rug with the twins, both girls curled into his arms as he hummed the lullaby their mother wrote. Elena sat nearby folding tiny clothes, her expression calm, peaceful. Claire's eyes softened as she whispered, "I was wrong." Adrian didn't argue or gloat. He simply nodded. Healing didn't need winners. It needed willingness. The staff noticed the change too. The nurses who once doubted Elena began observing her interactions with the twins, not with suspicion now, but curiosity and respect. They asked her questions. They followed her pacing. They learned from the gentleness she carried so naturally. "It's not magic," she told them shyly. "It's just patience." But Adrian knew it was more than that. It was heart. One evening, after the twins fell asleep, Adrian found Elena standing at the back entrance, watching the sunset slip behind the fields. She looked thoughtful, almost uncertain. "I've been thinking about leaving," she confessed quietly. "Not because I want to, but because I'm scared I'm becoming too much in their lives." Adrian felt a sharp ache at the thought, the kind that made his breath unsteady. He stepped closer, careful not to rush her. "You're not replacing anyone," he said softly. "You're helping us find pieces we thought were gone forever." Elena blinked hard, emotion shimmering in her eyes. "I don't want to hurt them," she whispered. "Or you." Adrian shook his head. "You're not hurting us. You're healing us." The truth of it settled between them, gentle and warm. Later that night, Adrian placed the girls in their crib and watched as they reached toward Elena with sleepy hands. She leaned in and kissed their foreheads, whispering goodnight with a tenderness that made the room glow. The twins relaxed instantly, their tiny bodies melting into the mattress with complete trust. Adrian felt his wife's presence in that moment, not in sadness, but in gratitude, like she was watching the life she hoped for finally coming true. When the house finally grew quiet, Adrian walked Elena to the hallway and spoke the words she didn't expect. "You have a place here," he said, "not as staff, not as a temporary help, as family." Elena's breath caught, her eyes filling with tears. She didn't answer right away. She simply nodded as a soft smile grew on her lips. And as they stood there in the golden glow of the nursery light, it was clear that every broken piece of their past had brought them here, to a new beginning none of them had seen coming. Thanks for listening. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that remind us that goodness is still alive in the world. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. See you in the next story.